Hi everyone and welcome to the second part of our landscape material tutorial. If you haven't watched the first part, I'm gonna add a link to it right here. Check it out first. So in the first part we covered how to create a landscape material and how to add layers to it, like dirt and a mud layer is what we added. So we can now paint in our different layers and they're gonna get height blended. Let me quickly remove this again. In this tutorial we're going to cover how to add procedural puddles on top of this that automatically conform to whatever lies underneath them. So let's get started. So this is what we created last time. And you can add how many layers you want to this. Just be careful, the more layers you add and the more layers you use per tile, the higher the performance cost gets. So be careful with that, don't add more layers than you actually need. And now what we're gonna do is we're gonna add right here a material function that's gonna allow us to add or to paint puddles on top of this. So to get started with that, we're going to add a new material layer and do that by going to materials and textures, material function. Let's call it puddles, material layer, and I call it tutorial. Let's open that up. So we covered material functions in the last tutorial, so check back there if you're not sure what this is. But for now, let's get some textures in here. So let's get to our textures and take one of the textures from our material layers that we're using on the landscape. In my case, I'm going to use the mud. Let's just drag and drop them into our new material function. I'm adding these so that I can actually see what I'm doing, because these puddles are going to be procedural, and if you don't have any input textures, it's just going to display a flat surface. That doesn't really help, right? So we're not going to add any textures in this material function, but we are going to use these textures to drive our puddles. So basically the textures that we already use for our landscape material. And to get started with this, we're going to use our heightmap value, which we haven't used before. And we're going to use an if node. So let me just quickly set this up, and I'm going to explain what's going on afterwards. Need 3 more constants. I'm going to set this one to 1. And we're going to plug it into the a is bigger and equal to b, and a is equal to b. And the 0 one we're going to plug into a smaller than b. And this 0 constant we're going to plug into the b. Now let me give you a breakdown of what's going on here. Let's preview this if node so that we can actually see what's going on. At the moment it's just pure white. So if you haven't used this node before, what it does is it looks at the a and b value, and then if a is bigger or equal to b, it uses a. Oh, sorry, it uses whatever's plugged in here. If a is equal to b, it uses whatever's plugged in here. And if a is smaller than b, it uses whatever's plugged in here. So basically it has these 2 inputs that it compares and then selects whatever's put into one of these 3. So at the moment, we have our... Let me preview this real quick for you so that you can actually see what's going on. So this is our height map. And our height map has, of course, white and black values. The whites are where our texture is going to get pushed out, and black is where it's going to get pushed in. And we can use that to determine where our puddles should be, right? Because they should be somewhere in between these 2. So if we change this value right here, our result should change. So let's do just that. If we input a more reasonable value than 0, like 0.25, There we go. Now we have a nice selection for our puddles. And since we've used this if node, we can basically lerp between the sizes of the puddles with this node. So if I put in something like 0.5, our puddles get way bigger. At 1, they should cover the whole area. At 0, nothing. By the way we're doing this at the moment, the black areas are our puddles. So we actually don't need this. This was just to show you what I mean. It's the interesting part. And let's convert this one to a parameter and call it the puddle size. These two don't need to be parameters, they're just 1 and 0 values so that we get a nice selection between white and black. Let's actually use this mask that we created to add our puddles in. And to do that, let's start with our normal map because it's the most obvious one. So just use a lerp. And let's use our normal map as the B slot. And for the A slot, let's create a free vector by pressing and holding down free on the keyboard and then clicking on the canvas. And let's give it a value for the normal map of our puddle. And since it's just a puddle, it should be flat. So let's give it a flat value. If you haven't really worked with normal maps before, flat value is basically just a 0.5, 0.5, and 1 for the RGB channels. So in Photoshop it would be something like 128, 128, and 255. It's just a RGB value for a neutral blue, I guess. And let's plug that into our A. Let's preview this. At the moment it's at 0.5, so what we're doing right now basically is reducing the impact of our normal map. Actually, let me preview this for you. So this is what our normal map usually looks like. And now we're going to use this if and plug it into the alpha. There we go. We have a nice selection of the normal map of our terrain and the puddles with a neutral blue. So let's create a make material attributes node. And let's plug the normal right in there. Now if we start previewing this, so we can see how the normal map's already working. Of course, we have nothing else plugged in here yet. So, but something I like to do, I'd like to go a little bit further with this. So, taking this, and we're gonna add a little bit more to it, because what I find is that around the edge of these puddles, you kinda, these sticks and twigs and whatever is lying on the ground doesn't just stop right at the puddle, right? If you have real puddles, you kinda get the height information around the edge where the water is just hitting the shore. So I like to shift this normal map by a pixel or two so that we get the normal map information right around the corner of our puddle. And that's really easy to do, actually. So we're just gonna take our puddle size. We're gonna subtract from it. We're gonna subtract by another constant. Convert this to a parameter and call it the normal shift. And this is gonna be a really, really small value. Something like maybe 0.02. So we're taking our puddle size, we're subtracting it by this value, and we're just gonna do the same thing we did here. So let's copy the if and the 1 and zeros. Place this new value into our B. And our height map information into the A. If we preview this, and if we take a look at our other if, it's probably hard to see, but it shifts it inwards just a bit, just by the value that's our normal shift. Because we're subtracting that, right? So the value for our puddle size changes, basically. Now, let's use this as our alpha. So, what this is gonna do, is gonna just shift in the edge for the normal map selection just a bit. But that's still not what we want, because we can't really see it at the moment, but since I've created this before, what this does is, it looks as if the puddle's just ending further in, and gives a really strange effect on the landscape material. So instead of just using our complete normal map for B, we're actually gonna do something different. We're gonna take our normal map right here. We're gonna multiply it. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna reduce, we preview that, reduce the strength of the normal map and use that right around the shoreline. So let's create a 3 vector, multiply that with. And if you didn't know that before, the way you can adjust the strength of a normal map right inside Unreal is by basically creating a node just like this one. So 1 for the blue channel, 0.5 for the other ones. Okay. So at the moment, nothing much is changing, but if we reduce these values, you can see how it gets more bluish. Doesn't have as much impact. And I made a mistake here. There we go. That looks more like it. So, now that we have this, and if you, actually let's do this a different way, because if you want to have control over how strong this is, the way to do it is to create a constant that's put in something like the 0.1 that we want for our strength. And let's build this up to be a free vector. So append it by itself. So this is our R and our red and green channel. Now let's append this again. So the append node basically just adds another vector to it. Let's create a constant, plug it in, and this is a 1 because this is our blue channel. So now what we have is the same thing we created before, with the R and G being 0.1 and the B channel being 1. Let's plug this into the multiplier. We get the same result. Now we can create this, convert this to a parameter and call it normal intensity. So this is gonna end up the normal intensity for our normal shift. Now what we want to do is lerp this. And we want to lerp between this new value and of course our old default normal map. And of course we need an alpha for this. So let's move this over. Actually let's do a little bit of cleanup first. So these are on inputs. This is our puddle selection, or our puddle size. So let's call it size. And all of this is gonna be our normal. So let's move this over. So at the moment we have a really nice selection for, probably this. A really nice selection for where our normal map should be for the puddle and for the landscape material. And now we want to get this little in-between area between this and this value. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna invert this one with a 1 minus node. So now we have it inverted. And then we're just gonna add it to this one. So we take our our Puddle Mask and add the inverted normal shift mask. And this gives us this few pixels that are where our normal shift should be. And then we can use this as a mask. We're gonna plug that into our B value. And now what we get is we get our puddles separated, and then just around the edge, for a few more pixels, we get the same normal map we have on our landscape. That's a nice area to see it, just with reduced intensity. Okay, so that's it for the normal map. So let's clean that up a little. Looks way more complicated than it is, doesn't it? Let's comment this so that we know what's going on here. And let's move on to the next part. Because now that we have the normal map, let's go ahead and build our color. And for our color, what I like to do, so this normal map has a really harsh edge. And the way color on puddles works, usually they don't have a color, right? They only have a color if they're dirty or really deep, and well, I guess that's when the dirt starts showing up. And it doesn't have a hard edge like that. So what we're going to do is we're gonna once again take our height map, multiply it, let me preview that, and let's multiply it by a constant. Let's say a constant value of 5 should work fine in this case. And what we're gonna do after multiplying it, we're actually gonna increase the power. Another constant. Put in something like 2. And what this is, it basically multiplies it by itself, making the blacks blacker and the whites even whiter. And this isn't between in a 1 to 0 range anymore, so this is a really messed up value at the moment, but that's just fine. So let's name these parameters because we want to change them later on. So this one is going to be our depth, because this value is going to basically define how deep our puddle is. And the power is going to be our opacity. Because at the power of 0, no matter what the depth, this is always going to end up with no color at all. And if the opacity is higher, it's going to end up as a complete colored patch, even if the depth is really shallow. So let's take this and clamp it. So usually you use, or in most cases, use a clamp to clamp between 1 and 0, which is usually fine. But what we want to do is we want to take, for our minimum value, our puddle mask. So what we created before, let's put that into our minimum. And this is gonna make sure that that we don't color our terrain, that we only color the puddle, no matter what we put in here. So even if I put in a depth of 1, which means the whole area should be colored, it's still not influencing the terrain around it, because that wouldn't get colored ever, right? So that's what we're doing right here. And then let's use that to lerp between let me put it in here, lerp. So this is our alpha. And the B value, let's just put in our regular landscape color. You can actually see at the moment it's just a black value. So let's create a free vector. Look that in here. And let's change that to a crazy color so that I can show you what's going on. There we go. So now we have the color for our puddles. You can see how where it's deeper, it's darker, and to the edge it gets softer. And that's what we want, and that's what we can control with the depth and the depth opacity. So let's change that to a dirt-like color. Something like this, maybe. Yeah, guess that's fine. Maybe make it a little bit darker. And actually, let's convert this to a parameter. Let's call it color. And actually, I guess this is the depth color. Just so that we can remember what's going on here. And with this, we're already done with the color. You can just plug this into our make material attributes. Now if we preview this, this should actually already start to make some sense. There we go. So we have our puddles, we have the normal map cut off, and we get some nice color in there. Let's move this up. Comment it. So this is our color. And now let's also adjust the roughness and the specular, because we also need those to make some nice puddles. We're gonna create another lerp, depending on the size of our puddle. Let's use it as an alpha. And for our B, we're just gonna use the roughness of our landscape. Let's preview this. So it's kind of hard to see, I guess, because this landscape is very rough, of course, but we can see it in the white areas. And for our puddles, we're just gonna create a constant. And what I like to use for the roughness of the puddles is something like 0.05. So it isn't completely black, but it's very close to being completely black. Now let's put that into our roughness. Preview that. And there we go. This is already looking like puddles, right? Now, we're not done yet. Because, as with the normal map shifting, I like to have the wetness shift on the edge of the actual landscape. So basically the inverse thing we did for the normal map. For the normal map, we shifted it inwards of the puddle just a little bit. And now I want to do the same thing for the wetness, just in the other direction, so that the landscape is looking wet. And to do that, we're also, and we forgot to change our specular. So let's do that real quick. That's really easy. It's basically just the same thing we did for the roughness. Let's add a lerp. It's our alpha. So once again, our puddle size mask for the alpha. And here I guess it's a little bit cheating. I'm not using any specular values in these. We have a constant. So we would take the specular from our material that we get in here. So let's add a make material attribute for now, or actually let's break it. Just so that we have something as a preview. And let's take our specular as our B value. And then our 1 value, we're just gonna actually let's add in a value for our specular. It's usually 0.5. So this is just so that we get a preview and it's something like what we're gonna end up with. And for our puddles, we want a really high specular, because this is water. So something like 0.75, I guess. These values are not physically based, by the way. I haven't scanned this. I just looked at some tables. If you want to take a look at what real world values for these are, I'm gonna link a blog post right here. It's not ours, but it's really good. It goes really in depth about water and its influence on wet surfaces. So take a look at that if you actually want to know how these values should be in a, I guess, real-world physics-based scenario. I just eyeballed these. So let's plug this into our specular. And there we go. Now we have some really nice puddles, right? So let's do what I already promised. Let's shift this wetness into the landscape. So to do this, we're actually going to change a little bit here. Because what we want to use is the mask we have up here. So up here, we have the mask for our color, right? And let's use that to lerp. And let's use this at the SDA. And for the B, we want 0. And we're going to create a constant. Look that into our alpha. Let's give it a value of, let's say, 0.7. Let's preview this. So what this does is it's slurping between this mask and a value of 0, depending on this scalar parameter, and let's call this our wetness shift. Because for the wetness shift, once again, I don't want a pixel perfect selection, because that's gonna look really strange on the wetness. This is why I use this value up here. Now let's clamp this. And we're basically gonna do the same thing we did for the color, where we kind of prevented the landscape from being influenced, just the other way around. So into the max, we're gonna put our puddle selection, our puddle mask. This is gonna make sure that we don't change anything on the roughness of our puddles, because they should always be perfectly rough, right? And now we can see here how we get around the puddles this darker area. And that's exactly what we want, because this darker area is gonna be the area that's kind of wetter. Now to control this effect, what we're gonna do is we're gonna add another power node. Let me move this over a little bit more. And now, as you can see, if we double the power, this area gets even darker, so it's gonna end up even wetter. So let's create a scalar parameter, and let's call this wetness. And I guess a value of 0.5 is fine. So we're actually reducing how wet it is now. And that's also really nice, because now we can also completely remove this effect if we want to. Now, for our roughness, which is this value right here, let's just use the clamped value over here without the power as a new alpha. Because the roughness is way more hard to notice, so this should be fine. But for the specular, we want that additional control. So let's use that one. So we preview this. We're gonna end up with something like this, where we have our specular for the puddles, our specular for the landscape, and then around the edge we're gonna increase this value. So that's what we want, but I'm not sure if it's necessary. So just for good measure, I like to add another clamp node right here. I just clamp this value between 1 and 0. Put it into the specular. Do the same for the roughness. This might not even be necessary, because I'm not sure if the lerp node is actually going to output values between that are higher than 1. Now we're sure they're always between 1 and 0. Okay, so let's preview this. And also, there we go. So as you can see, we have now this, it's really, really cool. This nice wetness around the edge of our puddles. And even in some areas where the puddle didn't reach, I think that's really cool. We're almost done with our puddles. Let's add some comments. So this is our specular. And down here, all of this is our roughness. And yeah, so now what we got to do is change this so that we can actually apply it to our landscape material, right? So let's do that. Actually, let's apply and save this, because we haven't saved yet and we don't want to lose everything we've done. So to make this work with our landscape material, we have to change a few things, and one of them is adding inputs. So let's do that. Let's add an input, function input. And this time we're gonna set the input type to a material attribute, because we're gonna feed our whole landscape material into here. And so that it doesn't complain, let's just add something like this in here. Now we can break this and take our values from here. So we have our specular. We also have our color. And we have our normal map. And let's increase our input so that it covers all of these. And this is gonna start getting really messed up, our preview right here, because it's now, it doesn't have any values that it can use. So we don't need these anymore. But if you want to change something or check something, rewire this to these so that you can actually see what's going on. And we have our roughness. Where's the roughness? There's the roughness. And for our height, if you remembered, we're actually doing our height in a different way. So we have these extra height outputs, and we're gonna have another input for that. So let's get an input. Let's call it height. And this is gonna be a scalar input. Let's put these over here. Let's get rid of this one, we don't need it anymore. And let's put in a preview value so it doesn't complain. Move this over here and rewire this height. So these are now obsolete. I'm just gonna leave them in case I need to check something. And now we can see that our preview, it's basically just the perfect puddle because it doesn't have any values whatsoever. So the next thing we need to change is we actually need to make this a output result. And we need another output result for our height map. So let's add another function output. Let's call it height. And to actually have a height value, there are a few steps we still need to take into our landscape material. So let's save this. Let's go into landscape material. And since we don't use the material attributes for our height map, we kind of need to lerp these by hand. And that's actually really easy. We just take this height output, lerp it. It's going to be our B. Our A is just basically the value for everything that's not covered by any of these material layers, which should never be the case anyway, but so you can just leave it at 0 or put it at 0.5 or whatever, it doesn't really matter. Now, How do we mask this? And for that we have a node in Unreal, which is the landscape layer sample. So here we can put in the name of our material layer, and in this case it's dirt. So this is, if we take a look at our landscape material, we have these target layers, right? Dirt and mud. So these are the names we're looking for. Because the information we paint in here, we can actually sample that in our material. That's what we're doing right here. So the dirt height is only applied where dirt is painted in. And then we do the same for the height of our mud. Add another sample node. Landscape layer sample. Let's call it mud. So now it's gonna select whatever gets output here, or the mud layer, depending on the alpha of that layer we painted. And just do that for all the layers that you have. Just add them. This is everything that I have. So let's comment this and call it the height blend. Or it's more like the height mask, right? Let's move this up a bit so that it stays clean. And this is what we're gonna put into our input on the puddles, which is the height. Because it's the blended value between the heights of all these material layers. So what we can do is we can lerp the height that we get here. And we're gonna lerp it with the alpha of the mask of our puddle. And so what we get for our material, landscape material, is actually gonna be the B value. And in the A value, we're just gonna put our puddle size. The reason we do this is our puddle size, this is basically a gray color, right? And it's the gray color that we use to select the starting point of our puddle selection. I'm really sorry, I can't really preview it anymore because we already moved on from these textures, but this is the perfect center of our puddle. So this is also where we want our height of the puddle to be. That's why we use it as our A value. And that gives us a perfect height for our puddle. So this is gonna be the output for our height map. Let's move this down a bit so it stays organized. Let's call this something like height. And let's call these our outputs. Save it. And now we're only missing a few things. Some of them being we need to convert these into, at the moment they're parameters, which is cool, but we need inputs, of course, because this is gonna end up as a material layer. So let's create more inputs. This one is the puddle size. It's 0.05. Let's rewire all of that to this one. And this is actually a scalar parameter. Let's not forget that. And for the other ones, I'm just gonna copy and place this one. So Control C to copy it. And actually, we want to use the preview value as default so that we don't need to wire this if we don't want to. Now we have more parameters over here. We have a depth. And we have a value of 5 for that. Also, it's called depth. Let's get rid of this. And a depth opacity, the value of 2. Down here we have the Wetness Shift. The value of 0.7. And the wetness at a value of 0.5. So you can create inputs for your base, specular, and roughness value if you want to. No, I don't want to change them, so I just leave them the way they are. Same for normal intensity, stuff like that. But I do want one for the normal shift. So I rewire this. And that's all of them. Let's save this. And one more thing that we need to do. The way this is done at the moment, it's just going to apply over all of our materials. So we're going to end up having puddles everywhere. And of course we don't want that. We want to be able to have some control, being able to paint them in using our landscape material layers, right? So we're going to add one more thing, which is a input. And this input, we're just going to call a layer mask. And this is a scatter input. And for now, let's use this with a previewed value as default and set it to 1. Actually, let's set it to 0. So this we're going to feed later on via another layer sample, which we then use to paint in these puddles. So what we're going to do, change a little bit of that. And instead of just feeding all of these values into our make material, we're going to lerp them. So starting with our base color, let's plug our result into B and our input value over here into A. And then just lerp that with the alpha from our layer. And now we're basically gonna do this exact same thing for all of them. So another lerp node, plug it into B, plug our metallic into the A. This is why this looks so messy, because we need to do this for all of them. I tried this with a material blend before. Oh. With a where is it? Material layer blend. And I tried the standard and didn't give the proper result. I'm not really sure why, because if we look at this, it's basically doing the exact same thing that we're setting up right now, but I didn't look too deep into it, so who knows what's going on there. I just do it by hand. And actually, while we're doing that, let's then plug these back into their appropriate slot. So do the same for the specular. And this our result always goes into the B, while the basic value goes into A. Don't forget the alpha. Plug it into the specular. Let's do the same for the roughness. Don't have any of these. We have a normal map. Plug it into the B. Our default normal map. The A. This is our alpha mask. Don't really need it for the ambient occlusion because we're not doing anything with that. And we also need to do this for our height map down here. Actually, let's bring this up because we... So lerp our height map, and default value from our height map, not from our make material of course, but from our input. And use the layer mask as our alpha. Plug this into our output. And I guess we might as well put it into a world displacement. So there we go. Now we can comment this so that we don't forget what's going on here. And this is our layer mask. Let's apply this and let it compile. Okay, so the material is now compiled and we can add it into our landscape material. So let's move this over and find our puddles material function in the content browser. Actually, I haven't saved this, so make sure you save it beforehand. Now let's drag and drop it into our landscape material. Now we need some inputs here. First, our material attributes, then our height map. Remember that we blend our height map down here. And then we have a bunch of parameters that we can connect, but for now let's leave it the way they are. We can connect the result with our output. Also, let's create a landscape layer sample. Let's call it Puddles. And connect this to our layer mask. Let's create a comment for this. And apply it. Once again, this is going to compile. Okay, compiling is done. So let's take a look. And this is what our material looks like. Doesn't really look correct, but anyway, let's go in. Let's go into selected, go into landscape mode, paint mode. What we can see is we have this new puddles layer. So let's create some layer information for that. And this is going to be non-weight blended, because we want to add it on top of the other weight blended layers. So I'm going to add this to my target layer tutorial folders. You can add this wherever you want. And then let's see if we can paint in some puddles. So it still needs to compile some shaders. So let's wait a second until it's done. So it's done compiling shaders. And as you can see, we can now paint in some puddles, which is exactly what we wanted. However, I'm noticing that our normal information isn't applied anymore. Going to take a quick look and see what's wrong. So the mistake was a pretty obvious one. Looking at our puddles, we forgot to connect the lerp from our normal map to our material. I mean, that's one big mistake right here. Let's apply that and compile, and then we should be done with our puddles. Okay, so it's compiled. Let's save it. And oh, there we go. Now we have our normal information back. We have our puddles, and this is looking fine. So with this ready, let's go back into our landscape material and add our parameters. Let's create a constant, convert it to a parameter, and for our depth opacity, the value is 2. Let's give it a name. And I'm just gonna do this for all of them, and then get back to the tutorial. So I added all of the parameters, and now let's group them under puddles. Once again, the values that I have here are just the default values that we set up before. Let's apply it. And save it. And now we can go in there and open up the instance for our material. Let me drag this over here. And to make it more obvious, let me change the specular on my mud to 0. And it's gonna be change on the puddles, it's gonna be more obvious. So we have, oh actually, did I forget to add the color of the puddle as an input? I totally did, so let's do that real quick. So let's add another input in here. This input, we want a 3 vector, exactly. And let's take the colors we set up here. So let's just copy these values. There we go. Use the preview value as default and call it color. Let's put that in here. Remove this one. Apply it, compile it, save it. Know the drill. So while this is still compiling, we can already add our free vector in here. Let's just do this by hand. Should be something like that. Let's plug it right in here. Convert it to a parameter. Let's call it puddle color, and let's put it into the puddles group. Let's apply this and save it. Okay, let's go back to our showcase, open up our instance again, and there we go. We have all our puddles, we have the color. Let's change it to something crazy so that we can see it. Something like that. And yeah, now we can adjust the depth, which is gonna adjust how much of it is colored. Let's change the color back to something a little bit more reasonable. This might be a bit too bright for my taste. Yeah, something like that. And we can of course change the puddle size. Make it bigger. Make it smaller. And we can also adjust the wetness and wetness shift. Make it completely gone. Kind of a little bit in there, add a little bit in there. Or make it cover everything. And of course everything in between. So, that's it for the puddles. I think this is looking pretty cool. Let's save this. And the other thing we want to do now is add some tessellation to this. So, since this video's been going on for quite a while now, I decided to move the tessellation part into a third part in the series. So I'm gonna make another video covering how to add tessellation to this material. So that's it for this video. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe. Also, if you want to see more videos like this. And feel free to check out our website. It's saintgame.net. And yeah, I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.